Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is fiction writer Michael Martone. Martone is the 2023 winner of the Truman Capote Prize for Distinguished Work in Short Fiction. He is the author of at least 14 books of stories, and he has taken a moment out of story writing to talk with us here today. I spoke with Michael Martone in Studio UA in the Digital Media Center on the campus of the University of Alabama. Well, Michael, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
You didn't have to travel too far to get here.
No, not too far.
Once in a while we have a guest who actually lives, practically within walking distance, and that makes everything nice.
Yeah.
First, congratulations. You are the 2023 winner of the Truman Capote Prize for Distinguished Work in the Short Story.
Well, thank you very much. That's
And-
very, very nice to know.
And it couldn't, looking at previous winners, looking at potential winners, which I do all the time, there's no one who's been more dedicated to the short story than you. Your last book had 153 of them.
Yeah.
They were very short.
Yeah.
You have, 13 books of stories, I think.
In various combinations of the stories.
Yeah.
Used in different ways, yeah.
All right. Two questions, kind of why this form? Why has this form captured you so absolutely? And in particular, why the short, which is the thing that I think you're most known for, rather than the 25-page story, you're known for the 2-page story.
Yeah.
And you've done this many times, and it's clearly your, subgenre, your métier.
No.
What is it about that form?
Well, I mean, I think it's a couple things. One is, as you know, I came to Alabama to teach creative writing. But before I came here, I was at other universities, and I just was, the weird timing of creative writing becoming a subject matter at universities.
Right.
And in order for that to work, I mean, before then it was an artist in residence, so Hudson Strode. But then when it became a discipline, and you were on a 16-week semester and a 1.5-hour class, what were creative writers going to teach? And one thing that is very difficult to do in a creative writing class is teach a novel. And so the 1980s, 1990s was a national renaissance of the short story, mainly because so many creative writers, so many writers of fiction were going into teaching. However, that wasn't why I was interested in the form, but it explains the other people who have won this award. Brad say, and I mean, just that there was a blooming in my lifetime of the American short story again. But my reason really has, I've never done a novel, never attracted me, but I did start out as a poet. And one thing about the notion of short story that bothers me is I'm not really a storyteller. These short prose things aren't stories. They don't have a beginning, middle, and end in the way I think of it. Characters don't go through a struggle and change.
No.
So they're lyrical. And that goes back to the time that I was thinking of myself as a poet.
I have a question here on this list of questions.
Yeah.
On that very subject. Your playfulness with language. Even when you write the dust jackets to your books, I could tell which promotional materials you've written.
Yeah.
Because it'll say things like the wondrous wonder and the moony moon.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you love wordplay.
Yeah.
And I've suspected for decades that there's a poet lurking,
Yeah.
but that poet has not emerged. Will the poet emerge in the future? Do you have that at all temptation?
I've been writing I continue to write poems, and in a way too, I mean, back to your original question, you know, the university is an ancient, traditional scientific sorting machines. You know, you work in a program, in a department, in a college, in a university. It wants to put things in a genre. And I'm a kind of writer that likes to resist that. And it's really nice to work with critics around who are trying to figure out what I'm doing, but I'm not particularly interested in that.
Right. Here, I've written about your work many times
Yeah.
over the years, and and I'm delighted. I don't know what sticks in my head. Some things stick in my head, some things don't.
Yeah.
But one of the things that seems to be consistent through several books, most fiction writers wish to write imaginary doings in such a way that the reader thinks they were real.
Yeah.
You have a variation on that. You write a thing that purports to be real, like the Blue Guide,
Right.
say, the Blue Guide to Indiana, which is wonderful. It's completely made up. It's
Yeah.
just in the model of, it's in the shape of nonfiction. So in a sense, you write nonfiction that is fiction, where other people write fiction that they hope people think is nonfiction.
Yeah, I
Does
think,
that make sense at
yeah,
all?
no, it makes perfect sense, and I think it's connected to, again, to this interesting cultural phenomena of creative writing in the university. And because I started working in there in 1980, the type of short story that was being written and was being promoted as the way to go was the realistic narrative.
It was Raymond Carver.
Right.
A slice
realistic
of real
narrative.
life.
And one of the there's a couple things I resisted in doing that. One was the idea of transparency, that and that comes from Gardner, and his whole idea that you should be successful if your reader enters a kind of waking dream, and no attention should be brought to the text. And in a workshop, often you'll hear somebody, well, this is the part that knocked me out of the story, you know, instead of going into it in a kind of dream state. And realistic fiction, and there are techniques to do that. I mean, that's also what Orwell says, too. You want to get a transparent style. And, but there is the whole other tradition of self-consciousness of the text. And this is an artifice. And that's the sort of school I'm interested in.
And I know where you got it.
Right.
You got it from John Barth
Yeah.
and the early metafiction of The End of the Road and the Floating Opera.
And also a contemporary of his, and also at my beginning, Donald Barthelme.
Bartholomew, yes.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
There's this metafictional streak that runs through these stories where the reader knows the author is playing with the character and the reader
Right.
simultaneously.
Right.
You have, one of the things that happens though, the stories, I am astonished at your energy in publishing these little stories. You've published, I think, all of them individually in 100 different journals, whatever, right.
It really, the university, the university said, well, you've published in Mudwump Review. And I say, yeah. Well, is this a good place to publish? I don't know. I don't care.
Well, you could just tell them the next time they ask, if they ever ask again, that you've published everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, they're individual bits.
Yeah.
Some of them are 200 words long, and they appear in an online magazine or a print magazine, doesn't matter. The other thing that happens, though, which your readers know, is that the volumes hold together. In the last two, the two we're going to talk about here, the Complete Writings of Art Smith, is a kind of a faux biography, kind of.
Right.
And Plein Air is a kind of a take on a decrepit Rust Belt, Winesburg, Ohio, with all the all the individual people there struggling to keep their lives going. So there are the volume of stories is held together by there is a structure for the whole volume, not just, even though the fragments get published sometimes individually.
I'm
You
a
come
real
close to a novel?
Well, I do think of them as books. I
Yeah,
mean, I
right,
say
of course.
I've never done a novel, but I have done books, and I think of myself. I'm not a realistic narrator or narrativist, but I am a realist, non-narrativist. You know, and so I'm not like a lot of my contemporaries now. They've gone away from realistic narrative to irrealistic narrative. So a lot of people are writing fairy tales, comic books. Those are still storytellers, but I am not a storyteller, but I work in the realistic world.
Some of your stories look to me like photographs. Some of them look like a segment on the evening news. Here's the city manager of Winesburg.
Yeah, that's why I chose as the subtitle sketches. I wanted
right.
And that's a reference to another influence is Turgenev's The Hunter sketches. You know, that again is not, it's not about huge transformations, but just showing the czar that the serfs are actually people.
Art Smith. There was a real person named Art Smith.
I know, what a name. What a name.
Who was a
Art
pilot?
Smith.
A pilot?
Yes, from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Of course.
Known as the bird boy of Fort Wayne.
And there was a biography sort of him.
Oh yeah, there's been some.
But what you've done is rewrite the biography. You've fictionalized a biography about a man who actually existed.
Yes.
And we should say, did Art Smith invent skywriting?
Yes.
He did.
That's true.
That's true.
That he is purported to do that, and also that there is some documentation of it, and it took place at the San Francisco exhibition, Panama Pacific exhibition.
And here's a question. This is beyond softball. Was he a good pilot?
Well, his other nickname was the Crashed Kid. He crashed continually. He couldn't get into flying fighters in World War I because he had broken his legs so many times. His legs were shortened and he couldn't reach the pedals. But he was a very good flyer in that he was one of the first to figure out what it is that this thing could do. He was one of the first to say, go loop to loop. And what they discovered, of course, was it was a gravity-fed injection in the engine
Of the white,
fuel.
The white cloud that makes the skywriting.
Oh, no. When it just comes to flying to make this
right.
loop, well, when they got to the top of the loop, the engine stalled. They just thought it would keep going. Well, of course not, because they were upside down, and so he would crash continually trying to figure out this new three-dimensional ship that wasn't going to work like a ship on the ocean.
Right.
So that was exciting.
Yes, and his death comes, not surprisingly,
In an airplane.
in a plane crash.
Yeah.
All right, what you've done is you've imagined a lot of the skywriting of Art Smith.
Yep. And there are pictures
And there are, which you have
which
constructed
we created
somehow or other.
of the skywriting.
All right, what we'll do, I will see that we get some of this on get a shot at some of these. But if Art Smith writes "wow" in the sky, then you write a facetious explanation, fictional facetious explanation of what that thing, what that writing in the sky meant on that day to the people. Have you got one that you know?
Yeah.
That kind of sense.
The book's title is "The Complete Writings of Art Smith, the Bird Boy of Fort Wayne," edited by Michael Martone.
Right.
And then the book is by Michael Martone. So the Michael Martone here is the editor, is a sort of bad scholar, a bad Don Noble, who is actually doing the scholarship on supposedly all this writing that Art Smith has done. So, And so the pieces.
He's explaining
Yes,
the
he's
skywriting.
He's what's it?
Explicating.
Explicating. That's what he's doing. So you want me to
Well, yeah,
give a sense of that?
that's where he says "mom."
Yes,
in the
he's
sky.
writing "Mom in the Sky," and Michael Martone, the editor, says, in 1925, flying over North Highlands with his mother, Ida, on board, Art Smith, the bird boy of Fort Wayne, negotiated a crash landing after the motor driving his de Havilland choked. Descending from 2,000 feet, he expertly volplaned his craft to earth. Neither was injured. It was the second such emergency landing he survived with his mother, who later said, quote, "I looked at Art and touched his shoulder. When he smiled at me, I knew I was with my boy and I was safe." Days later, his airplane repaired, Smith took to the sky again to commemorate this event. His mother, safely on the ground this time, blew kisses into the air with her gloved hands.
And if you and "mom" upside down is "wow."
Is wow, and that's the second story that
Yes.
goes along with this. Observed that day from further west, Art Smith's homage to his mother read as an exclamation. A farmer harrowing a field off Bass Road, his attention drawn by the pesky buzz of the airplane overhead, called for his wife to come see as the letters appeared there, punctuated by the blotting clouds. A year later, after the crash, he would not survive. Art Smith would be laid to rest at nearby Lindenwood Cemetery. During the interment there, a flight of de Havilland airships would bomb the gravesite with a dusting of flower petals. Ida, it is said, held up her hand as if to receive a homing pigeon or a hawk. Now, most of both those are true in a way. I mean, they're documented, but
It doesn't matter.
no, well, it is the juxtaposition and reframing. I mean, that's another thing about teaching creative writing in the way we teach it, is that we are so interested on the thing on the table, the actual prose or poem that you're writing, that we forget about the framing of something. And so, in some of my book, in the Blue Guide to Indiana book, I published a lot of those stories in actual newspapers and magazines, and negotiated with the editor to publish them without telling people that they were fictions, but they were actual things to do. And so reading them that way,
a particular monument or a factory.
Reading them that way, because the underlying joke was nobody tours Indiana, not even Hoosiers tour Indiana. So it was an interesting experiment to see how these things would be read differently. So much of what we do, because we're in college now, we're read, and I don't want to be read just by scholars or other writers. I want to be read by the people of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And publishing, say, in a newspaper, publishing these things in a newspaper or a magazine, as opposed to a literary journal, changes them.
And I would bet anything that a certain number of people, however small, went to look for sites in the guide to Indiana.
Yes, there are famous examples.
And they are not there.
Yeah, they're not there.
Well, that book, the Art Smith book, came out in 2020, and
right as the
pandemic was closing the world, shutting the world down. And so we've given it a little bit of attention.
Yeah, there's an interesting couple of stories in there too that I wrote in 2019 about the pandemic of
yellow fever.
Yeah, no,
Spanish flu.
The Spanish flu.
Spanish flu, right?
Where Art Smith actually flies over an infected area and injects his skywriting with Listerine. I was thinking of that 2 years before the President of the United States was sort of thinking of that.
Yeah.
So,
well, anyway, we've given it a little attention. Maybe people will.
I hope so.
It was hard to get any traction in 2020.
No.
The new book, Plein Air, is it's your second go at Winesburg, Ohio. Really?
Yes. Yeah.
First of all, Winesburg, Ohio, you must think is a significant and important book.
Yes.
You do. I do
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
I, in the teaching of the evolution of
Yeah.
American fiction, I think it is a real hinge. Things before and after that book are
Do you think
slightly different.
that hinge has to do? This is what I think, that the hinge has to do with the creation of what we now think of as character. That is, say, an American author before that would be like Jack London or O. Henry. And now we think of their characters more as caricatures.
Yeah, well,
But-
they're, yeah.
But what Weinsberg did was add that, what we call depth, to a character.
And, well, this is not the right place
Yeah,
for
yeah.
this, but also, yes, but the characters being portrayed are not, by any traditional standards, important. They are
Right.
little people in a little town, and they're not also of cultural significance in the way that Huck and Jim or Ishmael might be. They're just little people in a little town. But
And that's why I brought up Turgenev too.
Yeah, yeah.
The
The serfs.
contemporaries. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
this story, I mean, this latest collection of stories, why did you play off of painting outdoors, plein air?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wanted to sort of try to indicate that these are not stories, they are sketches, and in a way they're not paintings, but they're improvisations, they are spontaneous, and I really chose Weinsberg for a lot of reasons, but one of those is it was the 100th anniversary of the publication of the book, and also the other book that it references is, of course, Spoon River Anthology. And so there's all of that.
All right, you have in this book a whole lot of people, and they're quirky. You have a woman who's allergic to cats, but who saves posters of lost cats.
That's what she has in her home.
You have a person who is the last Fuller Brush salesman in maybe in the world. You have a person who's the last resident of the YMCA.
Which was true here in town. You know, the old YMCA was a hotel YMCA.
And there was one left.
Yeah, yeah.
You have a woman named Amanda Patch, whose book group becomes obsessed with the cruelties and tortures of dying saints.
Yes, yes. in unique ways, I think.
This is a town. It's in a sense a Rust Belt dying town. But one of the best bits I think in the book are the industries in this town, this Weinsberg, that are struggling. One is a hair. Is there an Indiana law about the disposal of human hair?
Yes.
There is.
Yes, there is. It had. I don't know if it's still, but when I was growing up, there was a specific way you had to dispose human hair.
But it didn't all have to be taken to one place and dumped.
No, that shows up originally in the Blue Guide, the
All
hair
right.
dump in Indiana.
And the Indiana laws on burial, not the state laws, but the Fort Wayne eliminated cemeteries?
That's based on the fact that San Francisco, which I learned from the other book, has no cemeteries. That after the earthquake, they moved all the cemeteries out of town to a place called Colma. So San Francisco has no graveyards.
All right, so you moved that
Idea to
legislation to Fort
Yeah.
Wayne,
Yeah.
which this then gave Weinsberg the opportunity to become a burial center
Yes.
for the dead people from Fort Wayne.
which is actually Colma, California.
Yes. It's the shift. Again, it's the same. There are similarities, parallels with Art Smith. That is, you're drifting along. You think this is real. No, this is not real. No, this is real. The laws are. You bend reality to suit yourself, to
Yeah.
suit your narrative needs, so to speak.
Well, it's also connected to another thing that I'm very interested in, you know, the Russian theorists and the whole idea of defamiliarization, that we live our normal boring lives, if we actually stop and think and notice it, pretty strange. You know, it's pretty bizarre, some of the things that we take for granted, and that we have to become used to. The fact that I always did this with my students. I had them write a poem on their cell phone and text it, and then send it off to somebody else somewhere, and then I'd have them read it, and they'd say, da da da, and I'd say, well, where did you send that? And they said, well, a friend in Portland, Oregon. And I said, Portland, Oregon? It's instantly there in Portland, Oregon? I said, all around us, we're surrounded by electromagnetic text, and that's not weird?
Oh, no, it's weird.
But we take it as nothing.
No,
Yeah.
the technological present that we
Yeah.
live in is a bizarre place for me, and
But
perhaps for you.
even on campus, I would take my students around and I would point to this bushy thing in the bare oak trees. And I'd say, what's that? They'd walked by it forever.
They didn't know.
They had no idea it was there, and then when I pointed it out, they had no idea what it was. And then I said, it's mistletoe.
What is your favorite little bit in Plein Air that you can read to
Oh,
us?
okay. I'll read something that I think also hits close to home. It's called The Dead Mall.
Oh, yes, indeed.
I still broadcast, and since we're here at the show, I still broadcast my cable show from the deserted and ruined food court. Yesterday I talked with Beth Ayler, a nurse who gave me quadrivalent flu shot on air. I own a one-person advertising shop doing coupons, mainly for Stettler's Auto Parts. Years ago I had the idea of doing a PSA-filled infomercial each noon on WEEP TV in Winesburg. The wicker chairs and the wicker screens, the ferns and the mother-in-law tongues were my idea. They are with me still, though the wicker is worse for wear and the plants need dusting. Once we had an audience applauding between bites of pizza slices and chop suey. Back then I worried that the bells and buzzers from the arcade would drown out the audio track. There was a shoe store over there, and you could watch people try on shoes in the background of so many episodes. I thought of them as the show's dancers, my chorus line. At night I watch the tapes, I still have the tapes, and I can track the dwindling. There I am talking. Middle school kids are singing, karate classes are kicking. The Kiwanis are raising money, this dog, this cat needs adopting. And the set grows dimmer, and the ambient noise hushes up. The wicker phrase, and more likely than not, I am alone on the little stage. No one to interview, no one anymore urgently seeking access to public TV access. One day, you look up and you realize you are this hermit in a ruin. I swear I must feel like that Roman centuries ago walking the streets of Rome, thinking he's still a citizen of a vast empire, and when he notices, suddenly, the walls of the Grand Colosseum are being quarried by the Visigoths to build their outhouses, and the center of the world he thought he once inhabited is now smack dab in the middle of nowhere.
And it doesn't take 1,000 years. It all happened in our own little lifetime.
That's true.
Michael, we are literally out of time.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks so
you very much. It's a pleasure to read them. It's a pleasure to hear them.
Yeah.
All right, let's get together
I'm
again
glad.
soon.
Okay, we will. Thanks.